Mike Santolo, Chief Analyst of Cabot Growth Investor and Cabot Top 10 Trader. I'm here with your Cabot Weekly Review, recording this late Friday morning on October 3rd. So it's kind of steady as she goes here with the market. Not a lot has changed. The major indexes continue to grind higher. You know, the big cap indexes look better than the others, but everything's trending higher. A little bit of rotation here and there. And, you know, not to keep repeating myself, but, you know, the action of the past few months, a big rally, very persistent, obviously. At least from a top-down perspective. You know, it's very rare. It's only been seen a few times in the past few decades, and it's always led to good things down the road. Now, there's no always in the market. You can never be sure. But at the same time, I think the odds, you know, it's safe to say the odds strongly favor, you know, nicely higher prices down the road. Under the hood, it's trickier. Okay, there is some rotation. We're seeing the broad market. It's not a mess, but new lows are a little high for where we would like to see them, the number of stocks hitting new lows. Especially with the indexes hitting new highs. So sometimes that just plays out. It's not a big deal, but sometimes it can be seen before the market gets into trouble. And then we're still seeing a lot of selling on strength. We're seeing some speculative names really move, which, you know, doesn't happen at the bottom, right? That usually happens after people get a little bit confident or overconfident, you know, and we're seeing, you know, a lot of names kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or just sort of chop around. So it's challenging, and I think the advice, though, remains the same. It's a bull market. Just take things on a stock-by-stock basis. Have some proper portfolio management. You know, raise your stops. Don't put half your portfolio in one stock because you heard it was good online or somebody said something on TV. You know, don't do something. Keep your feet on the ground sort of thing. But raise your stops. Take some partial profits. But at the same time, if you see a good setup, you know, take a swing at it because there are some new names emerging. There are some strong stocks that are, you know, they haven't been running, you know, 500%. They're relatively fresh. Maybe they're pulling back. So there are some opportunities out there if you keep your eyes open, but you just want to pick and choose among the best and some decent entry points. Okay, let's hop into the charts. As always, I'm using a program called Market Surge, product of Investors Business Daily. You can learn more at marketsurge.com. Not a lot new here. We have eked out to new highs here. This is the NASDAQ. You know, I don't know. You can get into the minutia. Certainly, we're extended here time-wise. Certainly, the market could at some point. It's going to top. It's going to break the 50-day line. I'm not saying it's going to be like this, but you're going to have a real correction, obviously, at some point, right? But you know, until it happens, you just kind of go with it. Right now, obviously, the trend is up. Big cap indexes, like I said at the outset, look the best. You know, hitting new highs. I'm seeing a little bit of rotation today. So now this is the S&P 600 small cap. Whatever, small caps kind of eking out to new highs here. Mid caps are probably the weakest index, but again, still in an overall uptrend. New York Composite, you know, just running through the norm, you know, new high today in the New York Composite, which is a good thing, all right? A lot of stuff is sort of, we've talked about this kind of sideways. Now, this is RSP. Today, it's hitting new high. I'm all for it. So maybe we're starting to get some, you know, broadening out, so to speak, in some of the buying. But this comes after a period of, call it a couple months of, you know, really no net progress and just a lot of chopping. You know, same thing with, we've seen some improvement, but obviously the growth index, this is MTUM, kind of did nothing here and then had one good week, and now it's done nothing again for another 3 weeks. So it's in an uptrend. I'm not trying to pick at it. I'm just saying there's a lot of things like, you know, this is industrials, you know, XLI, not doing much. This is transports. I mean, transports isn't obviously my main focus or anything as a growth investor, but just in the market, you know, not much going on there. We've talked about financials. This is XLF, you know, not much going on here. So there's, you know, the RSP, like we just said, not much going on. So there's a lot of parts of the market, a lot of stocks that are, you know, in overall uptrends, you know, above longer term moving averages, maybe holding their 50-day line too, but just not making a ton of progress here in the last, you know, few months. So we'll see if that changes, okay? In terms of just, we'll get into buy ideas or some things that look good, but we're still seeing some, so this is like Roblox, which was clearly a leader. You can see the run. I mean, it had a huge run. And I'm not saying today this break of the 50-day line is the be-all, end-all. It's still in an overall uptrend, and at some point, you know, things rest. But you clearly had a little bit of a top here, some selling on strength. And you can just see it's kind of approached those, I don't want to say a breakout level, but kind of approached resistance a couple times. And, you know, you've seen the selling on strength, okay? You have, you know, a lot of these names, you know, we talked about in the video. I've written up in Growth Investor, or sometimes top 10, depends. But this is like Insulet, which again, I'm not saying it's the biggest, you know, #1 liquid leader or anything like that. But sales, earnings, good story. You know, some medical stocks have kicked into gear. it started to get going, hit new highs, and then, there's been some news, there's a little competition, but the stock just kind of, again, it's not, the end of the world, but clearly intermediate term breakdown, Reddit. There's always kind of a reason they come up with, but, nice earnings gap here, obviously. And then, shook out, returned to its old highs here, or to new highs, 270 to 280, and now it's down to 200 and like a couple weeks later. Blackstone, we had mentioned, kind of had this nice looking, early breakout. Let's see how it goes. Just kind of gave up the ghost. Gene DX, which again, not the most liquid thing, but, kind of had this run and then just, it's really pulled back from mid 130s to 105 within a couple of weeks. So and these are not, these are things that I look at. So they have the story, they have some numbers, they do have some liquidity and sponsorship. Again, I'm not saying they're all, blue chips, obviously, but these are not just like speculative names or whatever. And so there's just a lot of that going on. There's obviously a lot that still looks very good, but, chances are if you own 10 stocks, it's not like 9 of them are doing well. You probably got a couple that are doing really well. You got a couple that are, some are sitting around, but you probably have 1 or 2 that are, depending on the week, coming under pressure. Somebody downgrades it, some news comes out or whatever. So it is that it's more challenging than it looks under the surface, with the index just kind of grinding higher. Doesn't mean there's not opportunities, but just, I still think you're seeing a lot of some of that selling on strength. At the same time, you have some of these names, like this is Intellia Therapeutics. I don't know much about it. They have no revenues. Well, I shouldn't say that. They have 14 million in revenues, but the stock, obviously there's some news here, but the stock goes from 16 to 20. I'm trying to look. I made a list of these. Planet Labs, PL. The stock broke out at 8 and doubled in less than a month, which is I'm not saying that's bad. It's good if you own it. I hope you do own it. QBTS, some of the quantum computing stocks are going nuts again. I'm not saying they can't double from here or anything like that, but as a student of the market, these things aren't usually running, before, near the market low. Usually they start running at the end. I remember the quantum computing stock specifically started to really spike. You can see this spike right here. That was back in November, December last year, which kind of was the beginning of a topping process before we went over the falls. I'm not saying that's going to happen this time with the market. I'm just saying clearly there's some speculation going on, which, we'll see how that plays out. But just keep your feet on the ground, like I said, have a plan, look for some decent setups, so on and so forth, okay? So just some names to consider, okay? I'm not huge on late breakouts sort of thing, but they can work. Sometimes they can work. And when I say late breakouts, it's like, hey, the leader broke out in May or June and has been running and continues to look good. But sometimes these things had huge runs, like this is VRT, this is liquid cooling. Let me pull up the monthly. It got going right here. This was the beginning or early 2023, and the stock had a huge run. I mean, the stock went up, 7-fold or something like that. So it had a huge run. It finally topped out here, and obviously got hit, and it's just taken a while to work its way back. But then, usually when you have these deep corrections, this is what usually happens. A lot of what we've seen this year was some stocks just came right back. Usually, far more often than not, the stock will correct, come back, and then kind of build a more proper consolidation within sort of the structure, and that will tell you that, okay, the weak hands are out, the big investors are back. That could be happening here with VRT. It broke out this week. It did hit a new recent relative performance peak, pretty good volume. It's got great numbers and everything like that. So just something interesting to watch. I'm going to mention NVIDIA here. Obviously, everyone knows NVIDIA. The RP line is lagging a little bit, but a couple of things I'd say. Number one, obviously it's kind of the flag bearer for the AI movement here. Let's see if market surge, there we go. Okay, so it had this correction, and this whole thing was kind of a reset, what I call a reset base. It kind of resets the advance. Took a long time, couple of big declines. And then not only did the stock kind of come back to new highs, but you had this very persistent action. I'm not going to count it here, I forget. I think it was like 15 of 16 weeks up, which is a sign early on that there's obviously persistent buying. So it's kind of it would be unusual for it to just top here and come back down. And the stock, sure enough, just kind of formed this very tight 7-8 week structure, and now it's kind of poking to new highs here. Let's see how that breakout works. Sienna is a fresher one. Mentioned this in Growth Investor this week. we're seeing some of these almost, as the Credos and the ALabs, not that they're totally broken, but they're the ones that had the shots across the bow last week. But you can kind of see some of these things are some of the fresher ones, haven't really blinked. So Sienna formed this base, broke out about a month ago, remained strong. At some point you'll get some shakeouts here, but pretty tight action here despite the big move and, rallying further. I'm not sure what you do with it here, but something to watch. SOFI, I think I've mentioned this before. Financials, obviously, this is financial. It's obviously more growth oriented. It has had a big run. Now you kind of do have, for the first time in a while, you're seeing some selling pressures pick up. Not a great week, but it is down to the 50-day line. Looks pretty normal. This is one where, me personally, it's like, hey, if this can, I'm not drawing an exact, buy point or anything like that at all. But, if this thing can kind of rally strongly off the moving average, maybe the financials kick into gear a little bit, could be kind of interesting. Lyft. This is an interesting story. Obviously, it's Lyft and Uber, but they have a fleet management subsidiary that could be big in the AV, the autonomous driving world. We'll see what happens, but clearly a changing character. It just kind of had this sort of endless up and down thing. But this one was tighter. Okay, it didn't go all the way back down, and obviously the stock has really come alive. Deal with Waymo, which is owned by Google. Nice kind of tight consolidation in there. RMBS, I might have mentioned this again, kind of last week, kind of a fresher name in the chip space. Big long-term breakout. A lot of tight weekly closes in here. Off the 50-day line, very big volume, so that looks pretty good. Software, software. I've mentioned this before, but like retail software. Some cybersecurity, a lot of cybersecurity, really hasn't been doing anything the last few months. They all kind of came back, snapped back very nicely in April, May, June, and they've been sitting there. If one of those can really get going, that would help for growth investors, in my opinion. But this is MDB, I've mentioned it, just very tight consolidation in here. Should have some solid growth ahead. The numbers are a little wonky, but clearly the action looks pretty good in here. And then Snowflake, which I toyed with earlier this year. You can see, great comeback to new highs, and then really just nothing for 3 months. But this latest post-earnings consolidation here looks proper. No real selling, some subtle signs of accumulation in there on the weekly chart. So just SNOW and MDB on the software side. Frontline, I think I mentioned shippers. So oil shippers look pretty good, and you say, Mike, oil shippers, but when they trend, they can trend. It's hard to have conviction in them because things can change, but we'll see what happens. Nice, looks like basically, we'll see where it closes today, but kind of 4 weeks closing tight here in the low 20s, just kind of resting after an up move here. So, and there's some others in the group that look good. AeroVironment, I think that's how you pronounce it, AVAV. This is really known for drones. And a lot of, spending on defense and drones. So again, this is one of these things that came back beautifully to new highs pretty quickly after the low, and then spent the next 2 or 3 months really correcting and consolidating and breaking some support. But now it's really come to life here. You can see on the daily chart, it broke out above 300 and it's just been smoke up a chimney. We'll see what happens. 2 straight gaps. Sometimes that means short term it's a little overdone, but looks pretty good. And then Shopify, which is kind of interesting to me. Again, my thing is there's a lot of stocks that have basically, just spent, it could be a month, it could be 3 months, sort of thing, but they've basically spent, I'm going to say 5 to 12 weeks, just kind of consolidating within overall uptrends. And the thing is, can the buying pressures broaden out, or is it just like, chip storage networking type thing? So anyway, Shopify certainly hasn't done anything wrong, but it's just basically been sitting around for a couple months. It tried to, you can see this, it tried to break out. Again, you see that selling on strength, but then supported the 50-day line, and now it's bouncing back. And as I record this, it's hitting new highs on very good volume. We'll see how it closes, okay? So there's certainly names out there that look fresher. Maybe these are sort of the late breakouts and they don't work because the market's ready for a correction and all that. And I have my eyes open for that. We do see some speculation. We do see some complacency. The broad market, like I mentioned in the opening, is a little, I'd say unhealthy. It's unhealthy given where we are in terms of the indexes hitting new highs, okay? Doesn't always lead to damage, but it's just something to be aware of. At the same time, really the primary evidence, we're not seeing a lot of stocks break down. We're seeing tedious action like this, not to just use Shopify as the example. So it's tedious action where it gaps up on earnings, comes back down, ramps back up, comes back down, and now maybe, third time's a charm sort of thing, and it can break out. And we're seeing that from some stocks, and if we see it from more, real breakouts, it could really broaden out the advance. Okay, just back to the top here in terms of the NASDAQ. It's been a good run. We've had, 3 shakeouts. We had a very relatively minor wobble here. So we've had 4 kind of like these little pullbacks here since the summer started. At some point, like I said, we will, we're going to sell off. We'll break the 50-day. You'll probably have to raise cash, take on some water. But, you could have said that 2 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago and 8 weeks ago. Right now, I think it's less about what the NASDAQ, even on a daily basis, less about what the NASDAQ or the indexes are doing and more about handling your stocks and in terms of, buying, looking at stock by stock basis and trying to get decent entry points in some fresher leading names, ideally on pullbacks, maybe on breakouts, maybe starting small and averaging up, but then, trailing your stop, partial profits, all that sort of thing. Okay. Overall, the action looks good. There's a few, yellow flags out there, potential near-term headwinds, but until you see it, it's okay to go with the plan. Okay, that's all the time I have for today. As always, thanks for listening, and be sure to come by again next week for another Cabot Weekly Review.